right. Well, welcome everybody to episode 2 of the P1 podcast, the one I am lovingly referring to as the people who actually did the work. And today we have Jeff and Matt on. I'll let them introduce themselves in their own ways, and then just spend some time talking through what technically happened at Platform One, besides just what the officers were running around telling people. And really hear it from the horse's mouth itself, and it kind of just peel back the onion on what worked, what didn't work, and just see where the conversation goes. So we'll start with Matt. Why don't you introduce yourself, and we'll pass it over to Jeff.
Sure thing. So I'm Matt Houston. I am the CISO for Platform One. I handle a lot of the authorizations and the policies that are associated. Created a lot of the pipeline documentation and kept us from going to jail from the security side of the house.
Yep, Jeff McCoy. I was the CTO of Platform One for some time. I don't know how long, maybe a few days or something. And before that, Space Camp with Matt and Kessel Run, and then just a random Air Force dude pointing satellites at the sky for 15 years.
Yeah, I think in my mind, Jeff and Matt always made one whole person. There was like a chaos creator maker of Jeff, and Matt holding him back of like not sending us to jail and following all the policy we were supposed to from a technical aspect. So it was really a beautiful marriage in my mind when I met both of you. So Drew, I'll pass it over to you for the next question.
Well, I mean, I refer to Jeff and myself as Jeff being the exhibit at the zoo, and I'm the zookeeper shoveling the crap that Jeff is throwing out.
Nothing's changed.
I always considered it like a rubber band type relationship where Jeff would run really far forward and then Matt would just like swing forward to catch up. Then we'd move on to the next thing and we just keep doing that.
You ridiculous idiot. Let's slow down a little bit.
But we never snapped, so it totally worked.
By the way, it's exactly the same at my new company. So
you guys touched a little bit on your backgrounds, but I think one of the most powerful things from your message is of the people that kind of were the OGs at Space Camp and Platform One, like you guys were no kidding software developers in the Air Force and had over a decade of experience. And there, can you talk a little bit about how fun that was and why P1 and some of your later assignments were maybe better? We'll start with Jeff this time.
Yeah, so I think you have to go back to what someone called the pre-Kessel Run days. So Enrique Odi is a madman, and he was at DIU, then DIUX, and he had this idea to take some leftover funding and go to Pivotal Labs and bring some random Air Force people that they interviewed and found. They just found these random people to hire and prove that the Air Force could build software internally, that airmen could build software. All of us got there, like already knew the stuff, most of the stuff that they were teaching, but it was great to have a new light because I'd always been an individual developer. I built, designed, created software, many different things on my own, but never worked in a big team. So it was some growing pains for me.
Jeff, if I remember correctly, you actually passed the interview for a designer position, not a developer, right?
It was a bad interview. For the record, all I said was, I design software that users love. That doesn't mean that I just design and don't create, but they interpret that as, oh, design. He said that key word. I guess that means he's a designer. So after the first day at Pivotal Labs, they changed me to be an engineer. But yes, I was hired on as a designer. That's the reason I actually beat Matt to Pivotal Labs. So when I started, it was like Mike Neeram and myself were the first two Air Force engineers that would become Kessel Run. A month later, Barrett LaFrance and others joined, including Matt Houston, for the actual software development team. But by then, I showed up. I was there as a designer, now software engineer. So I actually cheated to get my way in earlier.
I can't believe I never knew that Jeff McCoy was actually a designer, not a software developer. That is first learning for me.
Why do you guys bring this up? It's so embarrassing.
Jeff showed up with a portfolio, and that is what really drove it home to hire him in as a designer.
But it was software that I had built, not just design. I was showing it because I had a small business doing software in the Air Force on the side because enlisted pay sucks. So I just was writing software freelance, and I had a portfolio that I showed them. They're like, oh, he must design software. Designer.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I think I learned that from you when we were writing some bios for some ridiculous event that we were having way too much fun with. And you're like, yeah, like the only thing you need to know about me is I suck at interviews, and I got hired to be a designer when really I'm a developer. And I was like, this is perfect. Awesome. So Matt, over to you. And if you want to talk a little bit of pre-KR days as well. I think there's some good context to be had from the life before, if you will.
Sure, yeah. When it comes to like the story, the origin of a lot of the DevSecOps movement that we have going on through the Air Force, there, whenever we got interviewed to come out to Kessel Run, there were only three of us who were actual programmers that got included in this effort. Jeff not being one of them, but it was myself, Barrett LaFrance, and John Ringer who were Air Force programmers and lived a life prior to that effort. So that kind of put me in a weird spot because I actually knew what the process was to get an authorization. And of the three of us programmers, Barrett was a cross trainee that had just been working over at Wicca. And then John Ringer was a senior airman who'd never got an ATO. So I come in there with a lot of that ATO knowledge and really just hated the process. It was a horrible process that every 3 years you had to wait 12 months to actually build out a new package to submit it to somebody you don't know in the hopes that they're going to sign off on it. So that's what a lot of the legacy PMOs were about. But what that ended up being for me is, yes, I came in there as an engineer writing some code. Things were great. They found out that I had this information, and the next thing you know, I'm doing compliance documents and responding to fortify controls, and having to identify what we really wanted to do for a continuous ATO. And then, of course, as a team, we built out what some other good to haves that we knew we needed to include to make a proper CI environment. So I spent 6 years over at Scott Air Force Base in a little software area, writing some AMC apps before going over to NATO. I was working at NATO headquarters, and I got some experience. They put me as a network server admin, so not even in the programmer career field, but that gave me some insight that actually proved to be quite useful for what we were trying to accomplish with the DevSecOps movement. And then I got stuck in a hole in Gunner, the black hole for programmers, and then was looking for any opportunity to dig myself out. And then came Enrique Odi interviewing us to go out to California for a little while. And next thing you know, I'm PCSing with Jeff and Mike to go live in California in Silicon Valley.
Hey, one other thing too that's really interesting about networking, the power of networking. So this announcement for Enrique Odi's hiring event, I didn't get the email because it was looked at. I was in the AETC as an instructor, and they didn't feel like it was relevant to me. But I had met a dude at Cyber 200 training the year before that, who we talked about this nerd crap. He saw the email, thought of me, emailed me the day that my commander, the only time in her 2-year tour she was going to come to our detachment to visit us, that she was coming. And so she was on the way, and I stopped my boss and said, "Hey, there's this opportunity. Can I pitch this to the commander while she's here this one time in her entire tour?" And he's like, "I guess." But like, I would have, a chain of events had to occur for that to happen. That just happened to be somebody I met and remembered me from a year prior. And then they told me, otherwise I never would have even known about the email. I never saw it officially myself.
And actually, I have a similar story. I was a tech sergeant, and I had an airman who was actually talking to one of his friends that was another airman in a different branch that heard about this opportunity. And my airman, being responsible, he wanted a chance to get involved. He came to me and he's like, "Sergeant Houston, I want to, put my name in the hat and try to do this." And I'm like, "What in the world are you talking about?" And so I started running it up my chain, trying to find where this tasker is at, to find out that our branch chief had decided that nobody within our branch was eligible for this opportunity. At which point I put together two packages, one for myself, one for my airmen. And then, I think there was one other guy within PEO Bez that put a package in, and then we did interviews, and then ultimately I got accepted.
Making me feel some shame as a former officer there, Matt. But I also learned something about you today. Whereas Jeff failed the interview, you failed day one on the job because you told them you knew what an ATO was and were stuck being the cyber guy.
Well, to be clear, I didn't tell them day one. This ended up being like week 2 or 3. But yeah, then I got stuck. And as you can see, as a CISO, I still have that stink on me.
The cyber stench never goes away. That's what I've learned as well.
True. It's a stain on your life and your soul.
True.
One of the most interesting things that I think I watched happen at Platform One specifically in this like kind of startup culture within the DoD, even trying to figure out product market fit. And what I mean by that is we were building something, we weren't sure who wanted it or whether they'd give us money for it. So maybe we'll start with Jeff this time. When we started Platform One, tell me from your perspective what you think we were supposed to be building, and then maybe what we ended up building. Because it was never clear to me, and I was there the whole time. And then like 6 to 8 months later, I think it started to crystallize a little bit more. But at first, I was just like, I don't know, we're like doing a thing, we're doing the DevOps thing, right? So tell me from your perspective, Jeff.
Want to know a terrible secret that's going to really tick off a few select people? I've never read a DevSecOps reference architecture.
Oh my gosh, that actually makes me super happy that that's a true statement.
I've tried.
I was going to say that that's not a surprise at all.
It's so boring. Even the rewrite, I've glanced at it, looks better, but it's just a snoozer. Anyway, so for those that don't know, we were at Space Camp and Happy, by the way, and doing our thing. And Nick Shalon came and ripped us out of the arms of our cozy little place we were happily working at. And it was a bit of a drug deal. And there are people who really hate Nick, and they're probably fair in their hate for him because he can be a bit of a jerk sometimes, but it's part of a process to affect change. It's not all good, right? We have that the pros and cons to that style, but he was a disruptor at a very high level. And so we felt like we really believed in this idea of platform, not centralization necessarily, because that's not really true, but an open ecosystem of sharing for a platform. Because I've always frustrated by the stovepipe nature of all systems in the DoD. You know, from the weapon system level to just programmatics to everything's just stovepiped, and it really goes back to empire building and defending your funds or defending your billets, and it's absolutely disgusting. I mean, I wish senior leaders would actually, be more brave there and rethink that entire model because it's terrible. But for me, this was a chance to maybe do that, like what SoftwareForge.mil tried to do, like that open ecosystem at the DISA level to share code and to share resources and to share learning. That's what I'd hoped would happen. And so we were just trying to build stuff for an open ecosystem that was all public. You could see it all, you could critique it all, and people did. What we didn't appreciate, one was the kind of dynamics of politics around Nick and his wanting to mandate things, and me and Rob really not wanting to mandate anything and just wanted to compel people to use it by the goodness of it. What we didn't appreciate though was that some organizations saw it as a threat to their ability to gain influence or dollars or people or something. And so they made it really hard to work together. And that was unfortunate, but the original intent was to just build an open ecosystem. I didn't like Iron Bank at first. In fact, I told Nick it was a piece of garbage and I wouldn't use it. And that was when we started Platform One. So I told him it'd be valuable once I decided, once it was good enough that I could say, hey, I want to do a new thing. I'll use Iron Bank first. That's when it had met the grade. That took like 8 months after Platform One started. Like it just wasn't where it needed to be. So there was a lot of things we had to grow into, but the biggest thing I think for me was the COVID thing, which I'm sure we'll talk about more later on. But that kind of pivotal moment in P1's early history, where we made a choice to build something for warfighter collaboration before everything else, it really set the narrative on what we did after that point, I think.
Yeah, Jeff, you made the same mistake of saying a product sucks at the enterprise level, and then you had to go fix it. So yep. You're welcome. Like Matt talking about his cyber skills. So Matt, tell me, answer as well. Like, what do you think we were building, and what did we end up building, and how did that change along the way?
So, Jeff and I, whenever we were getting involved, we have no loyalty to our organization, right? We were absent guys who were living in California on the wrong coast, coming over here to Colorado Springs, working on a platform for somebody who didn't want us. So as we were building this out, what we were really trying to do is support the Department of the Air Force to support as many customers as we could just to help out and truly like bring that engineering to others. So, we would bring in some absent projects. We would reach out to Army Futures Command, and we were really just trying to wrangle everybody together so that way we could have that open architecture. We could have different eyes on. We believed in the culture that we had established within Kessel Run, at least the way it was originally designed, to really just foster that open communication. And that's what we were, trying to portray. And we looked at, Platform One as an opportunity, one, to partner up with some other folks down in San Antonio, but two, to have some backing at the enterprise level so that way we could do this at a larger scale. And I think that's, in my mind, where we were heading. We were very happy, as Jeff mentioned, with Space Camp. We had caught our stride. We had gotten our authorizations. We've proven that Kessel Run wasn't a lightning strike, right? And we were really moving things forward. But we wanted an opportunity to see, okay, how else can we impact the greater community? How could we stretch it out? How could we scale this to support others? If it meant, having some more folks coming in to get a taste for what DevSecOps could be, and then moving on and helping them create their environments, working with some of the other communities. That's really what I felt we were trying to do as we were standing this up. As Jeff mentioned, Nick is definitely has a rough exterior. But I mean, he wasn't wrong. He knew that he had to break some of the China to be able to get us to move forward. And to some extent, that was good. To a lot of extent, it wasn't, because it did hurt some of our relationships that we had, that we are now in the process of trying to patch up.
Following up on one of the things you guys kind of both mentioned, a little bit of the politics, a little bit of fiefdoms and kingdom building. I don't know that there was a day at P1 or Space Camp, I can't remember when it was, that broke my heart more than the day I came in, Matt, and you told me that you had to remove your rank from your signature block so people would actually read your emails. Like that's the kind of thing we were fighting on a daily basis, right? Like, it doesn't matter what your opinion is or the value of your opinion to some people, and that was always really tough. I think in a lot of ways we overcame some of those, which is good. And kind of want to follow up and pull the thread a little bit more on this concept of establishing a community. We talked a little bit about good, better, and different, Nick's influence, probably all three at different times to different people. But can you guys walk through, because one of the main things we were trying to accomplish at Platform One was to break down silos. Can you guys walk through some of the things we tried to establish the community with the swags, with different program offices, et cetera, where we failed, and maybe where we could even still be better today now that we've seen the world for 2 years and operated in this space? Maybe start with Matt this time.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the entire time that Jeff and I was, progressing throughout this movement, we started Kessel Run, and then, we were trying to continue to build that. And then whenever we came out here to Colorado Springs, we wanted to maintain some of that connection. And that was the same time that Kobayashi Maru was coming up. So we actually had Davis Gunter and Carlos Verre out here in Colorado Springs and trying to see how we could move forward together. And as we were building things, we were trying to socialize what we were trying to accomplish. There were definitely some differences in opinion, at which point, Kobayashi Maru completely broke off and, went their own way and made sure that they weren't communicating back with us. So, we were trying to reach out. I believe, Jeff, you were running some campfires, trying to bring everybody together. I mean, we continue to do the Big Bang talk. There was, just the Platform One talk. I mean, trying to find ways, avenues where people can connect, and then just really stretch out. And even if it's not the perfect thing for everyone, at least they'd be able to get some sort of insight and be able to collaborate with others who are like-minded and get some ideas sparking up. So like I said, there were a number of efforts that we tried. Most failed, and we had to try to pivot, change the flavor of it, and still try to push for that collaborative effort.
I think one of the things that also hurt a lot was the best intentions with Nick and Lauren, which, you know, Nick's a lightning rod. Lauren is kind of one of my personal heroes. So there's that. But like between the two of them, they were trying to find ways to leverage their authorities to help make the community better. But sometimes the direction towards mandates, all it did was just turn people off. Like what I wish we could have done was mandated collaboration, right? And let the ideas land where they land. Like that was the one thing I asked from every software factory worked with the whole time, is just share your stuff back. Like I don't care if my stuff is the best or the worst. I just wanted to have the best amongst all ideas. We at my company now, at Defense Unicorns, we highly believe in an idea meritocracy, and we believe in the best ideas winning out at the end of the day. That doesn't mean that the boss has the best idea or the worst idea. Just whoever has the best ideas wins. The problem with the software factory ecosystem for a long time has been it is not that. In fact, it is very much whatever the best idea is in your organization. And don't share that, because that actually could be a problem, because then they could know about your weaknesses. And what we would do is we'd publish everything and people would attack the things they perceived as weakness. And we'd say, great. My phrase was, people heard it 1,000 times, tell us where we're stupid. Tell me where I'm stupid and we'll fix it. But instead, what people would do is we'd publish these things out, and then they would go to some other senior leader and say, see, look, this is why we can't use platform one, because of this vulnerability or because of this issue. So rather than fix it, they would weaponize it against the organization. But we'd still share it anyway, because maybe we're hopeless idiots, but we just believed in this vision enough that we just kept doing it. And I did the campfires to transparently share with people who I knew were going to use the words against me later on what we were doing, what we were struggling with, because I felt like it was the right thing to do. And I still believe it was the right thing to do, even if the government is in its current state, at least in military, is set up to fail in that regard because of the structures of incentivization we have, but it still was worth it to try it. And I still believe in that. And I do believe if every software factory and joint forces were to just share their crap and actually share the lessons learned, they would all still be better. And I know they all want what's best for the warfighter. I know they all have the best of intentions. I know it's not like just brinksmanship and political junk all the time, but something in the incentivization structure in the DoD is making these software factories sometimes play those political games. And I do think they're getting better, but I think part of it was just a mandate culture that we had at the top was mandating the wrong things. Like Rob and I fought vehemently, and we did it publicly too, against mandating Platform One, mandating Platform One DevSecOps services. We knew it was the wrong thing. We even fought against mandating Iron Bank. We just didn't believe it was the right thing to do. All I wanted was to either strongly encourage or mandate sharing and collaboration, and then letting the ideas win out from there.
Yeah, nobody mandates that you use Google to search the internet, right? Like you could use Bing if you wanted to.
The experience mandates it.
Yeah, I mean, it's all really good points. I mean, something you said that really resonates with me. At the end of the day, like to be truly agile, I think it requires one thing, and it's the courage to be honest about your failures and just be open about them. And unfortunately, a lot of times you see a lot of perverse incentives in the government that say, like, if you failed, even though you want to get better and the intent is to share that, it becomes a weapon against you. And I can't tell you the number of times, and I know this will resonate with Matt, like pen test results come to mind right away, right? Like, oh, I should share my vulnerabilities with the rest of the DoD ecosystem so they can patch their same problems, because good pen test engineers are really hard to find, and we should share this information. The opposite actually feels true every day, is like if you share that information, they're going to attack you and take your money and people. And like they're missing the entire point of incentivizing value delivery to the warfighter instead of like empire building, a budget and people to get promoted, right? And it's been one of my biggest frustrations with government work, is just the incentive structure of getting promoted and advancing in a career is honestly against mission value a lot of times. Which brings me to the next question I want to ask you, and Jeff, we'll start with you this time. I didn't know it's internal to my soul for my over a decade of living in the government, but I always felt that the government could lead software successfully just as well as industry could. And I tried to do it before I met you guys, and I don't think I was doing it very well because I lacked expertise in certain areas on the government technical competency side. But then when I met you guys at Space Camp, I really felt like what we were about to do at Platform One and scaling it was going to work. And you guys kind of pioneered this, quite frankly, at your DIUX time, that what became Kessel Run. Tell me just your thoughts in general about the government's relationship with the defense industrial base and like what that relationship looks like when it comes to building software. Because what Kessel Run really pioneered, in my opinion, is this idea of government-led software integration without having a traditional system integrator doing that work for the government.
Yeah, I think that was what I always tried to do, right? Was to um, and try to be a lead in software as a government person, first as an E7, then later on as an NH4 in the 15 pay band. And for me, it was this idea that that Kessel Run did prove, which is that there are totally people within government who are capable of doing this, and Matt and I obviously we both knew the whole time we could get out and make a lot more money in the commercial sector, but we stuck it out for a very long time. Well, Matt longer than me because I gave up last year. We stuck it out for a very long time, years and a couple decades even almost, trying to push this forward and do this. That doesn't mean that we did everything ourselves, right? It's more about team empowerment and enablement, but also like not being BS'd, right? I think that's super important, right? Because like if you're a govy, right, you're a government lead and you have no technical ability, that can be okay, that's fine, but you have to have somebody you trust, right, who has your best interest, not their company's best interest, not their agenda or whatever, but your mission, your people that you're trying to deliver for is best interest at heart. Which there are programs for that do this, like FFRDC and other things that can help in that regard. But you either have to be able to be that person or have somebody that can speak to you honestly and bluntly, and to those teams honestly, that has the same interest and the same kind of goals and motivations, which is, I think, really hard to do. And I think that a lot of software organizations don't have that luxury, because it's just like if you're hiring, for example, a vendor, right, to be your technical lead and your advisor, are they going to advise you against to use their competitor's product? I've never actually seen that happen. Like I've always seen the opposite. And it's like, well, that's super convenient. You're recommending you use the product that you're about to make a bunch of money off of. So that's like a really important thing for me, is you have to find, if you're the govy and you aren't the technical person, like you don't have my skill set, for example, that's fine. You need to find that person that you can trust, that has the motivations for your customers at heart, and not just somebody else.
Yeah, and I would probably say that what we did whenever we were trying to get Kessel Run up and operational is demonstrate how you can be agile. Right? We know that agile, you want to fail fast and then recover. But the Air Force, it wasn't willing to do that with our own people. Right? My programmers and the different leaders that I had, if we failed, then we would get letters of counseling, and we would get in trouble and then get put on to crappy details. But what we ended up doing with Kessel Run was we took responsibility, right? We, as the government leads, would own the failures. We allowed the groups that we were working with to be able to push out code that didn't work and then be able to iterate on that. And the government was owning the responsibility of the success or the failure of that particular application. And I think that that's really the eyes that we need to look at all of these products that we're building out. And we were able to demonstrate that at a very micro level. But what this really needs to turn into is that big Air Force needs to treat the software factories as such. So we need the senior leaders, the material leaders, to be able to take that onus, to take that failure or success and put it on their own career, and let the different product teams, let the different services fail. As Austin, you mentioned, the pen test. If I had findings within some of the pen tests, that's okay, right? That's how we get stronger. But instead, it gets weaponized and it gets fingers pointed, and that's what we can't keep having happen. And that's what is driving the culture within the Air Force that we're trying to change. We need that protection, that ability to find something that's wrong and fix it. Instead, we end up finding something that's wrong, and then it's a fire that we're all frantically trying to fix before somebody gets in trouble. And that's not how it should really work. Whenever Jeff and I were starting up Kessel Run, we were actually told by plenty of senior leaders that this was going to be a career killer for us. And, quite frankly, we put our foot forward and said, you know what, we don't care about our career as much as we care about seeing this succeed. And that's what really, drove us to try to further along this movement.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up that accountability part, because that's something in acquisitions that's always drove me insane, is like a lot of people treat it as you get to contract award and hand off the responsibility to some system integrator to build a thing. And then you sit back and you're just like, well, they're obligating a spending and like meeting a schedule. And if the schedule changes, like, oh, I don't know, contractor X said it was going to be later. So it just is what it is. Whereas like it's the government reinserting itself in the part of like, if it's failing, it's nobody's fault but the government, right? Whether we're admitting it or not, whatever role we're taking, it's always been true. It's just been whether people are willing to have the courage to admit it.
Yeah, I think one of the cool things we incorporated too from this like no vendor lock concept. It's like in the early days, like think of a product like Kubernetes distribution, for instance, comes to mind, right? Like we know there are multiple vendors out there in that space. We tried them all. To Jeff's point earlier, like let the best idea win. Let's try multiple different things, find the goods, the bads, the uglies. And then like even today, we use multiple different distributions because it helps our customers when they ask questions about us. Be like, oh yeah, we have 3 environments running on that. Let's engage the engineers on the team who can actually solve your problem for you, instead of go ask vendor to fix vendor's problem and they give you more money or you give them more money.
Yeah, I think that's also a good point too, because there's been a lot of contention around that whole concept of you're thinking about the wrong thing if you're worried about, vendor lock. Like vendor lock doesn't matter. That's been a very common theme I've seen, on LinkedIn bubble up a lot. And to some degree, that's totally fair. Like sometimes it doesn't matter. Like for example, there are vendor platforms out there for real-time operating systems that might be the only good option. And so it totally doesn't matter. But there are other times when it's just a convenience decision because they're being advised by someone who says you should do this. Like there's a totally different, there is a time and a place when vendor lock is not a discussion you should have. It all maps back to value. It all maps back to what you're delivering and how you're delivering it and what's going to be most effective today and tomorrow and long-term future. And then that goes back to build versus buy too. Like I have always deferred to buy being open source free or commercial or whatever, whenever you can, and only build if you must, because I think that's the right thing to do for the taxpayer. But sometimes there are times when you just need to build or modify open source, and that's fair too. But all this goes back to that, my central point of without the right technical advisement, you're going to put yourself into a corner every time. And we've seen it with software factories in the DoD. We've seen them have to do major pivots over time, and it's extremely painful and complicated and very costly. And for Kessel Run, the PCF decision, when we made that decision, it made a lot of sense then. And the reason we did it was literally because we were on the 5th floor of Pivotal Labs headquarters, and the 4th floor was headquarters for PCF. And they already had a separate environment that NGA had already pioneered. There was already a lot of traction there. It made all the sense in the world to just do that. But did it make sense 4 years later as everything was pivoting to Kubernetes? No. But at the time, it did make sense, right? So there's context that goes with that as well. And it just has to, I think the entire community needs a little bit of grace when it comes to early decisions, and then how those decisions have to change over time. Because somebody coming in 4 years later and saying, I can't believe you guys did that 4 years ago. Well, okay, yeah, but 4 years ago, these other options weren't even a thing. So where were you then? Thanks a bunch, right? So we have to have some balance and some grace as well when we critique prior decisions people make.
Right. And I think along these lines, the thing that I'm, most proud of is as we were writing our authorizations and trying to, figure out exactly what we're doing, we were able to authorize practices, procedures and stuff, mechanisms to swap out technologies. And that way, if, a particular code scanner wasn't the best scanner next year, we wouldn't have to wait 3 years until our ATO expired to go and replace it. Rather, we could, gather our body of evidence, document what the analysis of alternatives were, and then move forward. And that I think is how we're going to revolutionize a lot of the cyber policy and ATO process in general, is by having the flexibility to actually move our technology and not be locked into one vendor because of our own authorizations, because of our own policy requirements.
Yeah, I really like that. It's all about like eyes wide open as you make decisions, right? Like the decision itself is actually not the important part. It's the way you go about getting the information, talking to people, figuring out what's important and what's not that goes into the decision. That's way more important. Jeff, you had touched on this a little bit when you were talking build versus buy, even if buy is free or open source software. There seems to be like a stigma around free and open source software in the DoD. I think it's gotten slightly better in recent times. Maybe Matt, will start with you this time as our resident cybersecurity expert because you know what an ATO is. But like, can you talk a little bit about your experience in the Air Force and some conversations around free and open source software and how we've maybe helped change the game there a little bit?
Yeah, I think that the most dangerous thing about the FOSS type software is ignorance, right? And I'm talking about ignorance of the folks that are actually mandating that we don't go that route. If you look at a number of the practices and the procedures for getting things on an approved product list, or just in general, the amount of analysis or lack thereof that went in to a lot of the software being used within the government a decade ago. And again, you know, me being a software developer, I know what that process was. Then it would just, you know, scare the pants off you, and that's, you know, that's just short-sighted, right? And ultimately, ignorance isn't a bad word. It's just the definition is the absence of knowing. So, you know, not knowing what the process is to get something approved, and then, you know, looking at something that has, you know, everybody's eyes on, I can understand how that's scary. But through education and then being able to understand what free and open source really means, and then, you know, setting up a practice, a process around how we're looking at that software, then that removes a lot of the fear from actually being able to use it. Like we can scan these open source products. We know what risks that we're going to be taking on, right? And to an extent where we know more than what we do with a lot of COTS-based products. So if anything, we should fear free and open source less than we fear COTS products that have IP that we're not allowed to see, right? Because at least I can scan those documents. I can look for information that is going to potentially bite us in the end. And I can put in mitigations if that is indeed an issue. So I think that that's where we're at. And, you know, through the education pieces, I talk on a daily basis about what we're trying to accomplish and how we're trying to change the approved product list procedures, just so that way we have the information. And it's, you know, it's honestly the more information you have, the better decision you can make. And we can get more information from a lot of the FOSS stuff.
The discussion's a little silly, honestly. Like focusing so much on FOSS as a risk, but pretend like somehow commercial software is more secure. It's all just software. It's instructions to a computer. Somebody wrote it, some human probably. Maybe it was GitHub's little AI copilot, but a human wrote it at some point, right? And the point is like, do you trust random company X? It could be a big prime with thousands of people, but thousands of people aren't going to know that code base. Like it may still be maintained by one dude at the company who might be thinking about quitting next week. And you don't have that information, right? Like we can complain all day about the FOSS ecosystem and the examples like the colors.js thing that happened a few months ago, or some other like stupid stuff that's happened in open source, but the risks are still just as much there in commercial black box software. To Matt's point, if you can't scan the source code, I can't understand how you could possibly at a in a better position than if you it's black box to you. We have tools to help with this. I do think that the SBOM kind of it's trendy right now, right? And there's some mandates that have come out, so that's cool. That'll help a little bit here. And Log4j, I think, was a wake-up call for some people. But like these risks have always been there. Open source, commercial, it's all there. In fact, that's one of the strengths of DevSecOps and container security in general, is we can still have less trustworthy software and put iron gates around parts of it to protect stupid stuff from happening. Like the Log4Shell, Log4j stuff could have been mitigated or blocked by certain service meshes. Some of the service meshes have done a bad job of answering that, right? Because the actual JNDI export thing that it's doing requires a network call that you can block at the container level. I know this is shocking people, right? And not even like a tailored for that bug fix, but like prevented it from ever being a thing to consider, right? So there's like lots of things that we can do to mitigate this scary software. But when it comes to FOSS itself, it's disingenuous to pretend that just because a company, which might be a 3-person LLC or a 10,000 person company with 2 people who know that tool, somehow is magically better than open source. It's simply false. However, that being said, everything, I think it goes back to due diligence, right? You have to do your due diligence on investigation. Should you trust that software? Should you trust these contributors? Should you trust where it came from and how they built it? I do this with everything that we adopt. And the software I'm working right now for the submarine community, for the Navy, I have to be very careful. There have been tools I wanted to use, but they're written in Eastern Europe, right? And so like I could probably justify that and probably get away with it, but it's going to cause more friction with some of my government customers that would adopt it. So I choose not to do those things. Sometimes I have to write the code myself or find a different tool that is less optimal because it's an easier justification to government people when it comes to attribution of the code. So there's like all these things that go into decisions when it comes to adoption of software that are very reasonable to make and are really kind of mission dependent. And like if it's turning on a light switch in a bathroom, it probably means less important things than launching a Trident missile. Like those are different levels of like, do I care about the light switch coming on and off, or do I care about the missile launching? Like we have to make decisions right appropriately. And so I think that really what it boils down to is whatever you're working on, you need to know the context and you need to know if that software is critical. But one last point, if you're using a computer today, you're using open source software. I don't care if it's Windows. I don't care if you're using a Mac or a PC. There is open source software on your machine. Maybe it's just OpenSSL or some of the library, but you are using open source software if you're using a computer, unless you designed the machine yourself and wrote the operating system yourself and you commercial licensed it, you're using open source software. And so to pretend like you're not is just crazy to me.
It's a good thing I wrote all the software on my Mac I'm running right now then. Thanks, Jeff.
It wasn't a Mac.
Best part of the podcast, which is story time. And Jeff gets to start. I'll start by sharing because when I first met Jeff, I heard he learned Kubernetes at a car wash. And that was like one of my favorite lines I heard it at Platform One. Anyways, you guys tell us, there's a lot of weird things that happen at Platform One to make things work and go, whether it's a funny story or maybe some mission value we were able to deliver that you liked, but share your favorite story with Drew and I and the audience on what your favorite story was at P1.
There was one time when I accidentally deleted production environment for SSO by clicking the wrong button. That was fun. I'm pretty sure somebody wanted to like hang me out to dry and beat me, and it was attempted. But that was there's a lesson to learn there about UX and when production and test environments are purely identical except for one letter in the URL. But anyway, so that's a thing. But the actually more interesting and more probably want to think is the Mattermost story and what actually happened. I was in tunnel vision mode trying to do this weird Platform One stuff. This is, I think, March timeframe, and COVID restrictions are just happening. And I believe it was Eric Robinson. I think he's a captain or major now. He was in Hawaii. Now he's somewhere else, pilot dude, part of the Tron Air Force stuff. And he messaged me and he said, "Hey, these lockdowns are going to make us all work from home. What are you guys doing about that?" And my response was, "Nothing." Right? It wasn't even thinking about. And I was thinking about, and I was like, So he messaged me that, and a couple hours I was thinking, like, well, this is gonna be a big deal for all, the government is like a dumpster fire when it comes to remote collaboration. Like it's embarrassing on so many levels. So like we could probably do something about this. So I reached out to Nick and Lauren. I messaged them late Saturday night, and said, "Hey, I think we should do this." I just talked to Rob, and I was like, "I think we can solve something here to help get people collaborating again. I think it could be Mattermost. I know we wanted to redeploy that, and we've already done it before. We wanted to deploy the new stack, and Matt's team had just finished getting accreditation for the infrastructure side on Cloud One. So we were like, the stars are aligning here. We didn't have Big Bang in a good place. It was really, really bad. So what me and Josh Wolf and I think Jared Dillon from at the time D2IQ, he's now Mycelia. We just like banded together, worked for 2 or 3 days, a lot of hours, and started shelling out just like provisioning and infrastructure and Kubernetes stacks and getting things running, leveraging the accreditation that we had just been given. We initially deployed like Mattermost with just login from Mattermost directly for cost reasons and all this crazy stuff. And it turned in from like a few hundred users to a few thousand users to tens of thousands of users. and we started rolling other features out, and the Big Bang had to catch up. But that whole like crazy chain of events started with a, a a pilot saying, "Hey, this is a pain point. You guys should think about solving this." And then me going to some people and saying, "Would you guys back this?" And like it got all the way up to like DoD CIO level for some approvals, and it had run the CNAP stuff through to it at the same time. And there was a bunch of stuff that had to happen that I didn't have to deal with, that Matt's team had to deal with, and others had to deal with to make it legal, and deal with all the challenges to that came from joint folks disagreeing with the accreditations. But in the end, the result was we got the warfighters still able to do their job and still able to talk. And maybe it was like not the most ideal deployment, or maybe it was bumpy, but who gives a crap, because they were able to still do their job. And like there was a lot of people who complained about certain aspects of why we did that, or why we did that. But the only reason I did it, the only reason I wanted to do it, and the only reason people backed it was because it was the right thing to do. Like everything else, screw it. Like we needed to do this. This was the right time to do the right thing. And this was like my dream was always to make the Air Force better, and to make it grow, and this way of innovative thinking. So this was like the perfect opportunity. And Mattermost was the thing that started that. Of course, we built tons of other things on top of that, right? Lots of services for our actual goal was for developers to be supported. That was what we were supposed to be doing. So then we had to go bolt that on afterwards. But Mattermost, it started because it started to ease the pain before. This was before the Office 365 stuff that I did, whatever that thing was called. I never used it. But before that stack was approved or purchased, and there were bazillion dollars spent on that, we just threw something together over a few days with a few engineers just trying to do the right thing and help move the ball forward. And some missions adopted it for the next several years, in 2 or 3 years, whatever it's been now, to do their mission value, because it just made their life that much better.
Yeah, and I'd have to say that the best time that I've had during a lot of these activities that Jeff and I have been partnered up on was whenever we first came out here on TDY, back when we were still trying to plan out what we were really wanting to do for Space Camp. Jeff, Mike, and myself, we were staying over at the Marriott. And I don't know how many of you guys know this, but Jeff has a little bit of an addiction to Dr. Pepper. And so on our way into the office, we had to stop off at a 7-Eleven so that way Jeff could go get his fix. And while he went inside to go and get his drink, Mike Neeram and myself created a bunch of snowballs because it had just snowed that day. And as Jeff walked out, we just started pelting him with snowballs. So that was probably my favorite time doing all this. But on the serious side, though, the flexibility that we've had, we were a bunch of engineers that were trying to do the right thing, as Jeff mentioned, trying to get things done, trying to pivot fast, so that way we could get the mission accomplished. So even what Jeff had just explained about that Mattermost server, immediately after we got everything stood up and people started using it, it was spears that were being thrown at us. And I remember that we had a lot of senior leaders coming at us saying, yes, but is it a good environment? Like, you guys have an ATO, but why? How does that matter? How do I know that that's actually good? Had nothing to do with the fact that an AO, an authorizing official, had said that we met the requirements, that our pen test had said that we had secured it. They wanted more. So we were able to actually give our Kubernetes cluster description and all the things that made up that environment, as well as the Mattermost tool, to some folks from the 47th, and have them do like an on-demand pen test, because the community was so much concerned about what was going on, and call it COVID fear or whatever the case may be. We gave that instructions to the 47th, and they weren't able to find anything wrong with our deployment. So to me, that was the most proud that I've been, that we were able to accomplish something. And from a security perspective, being able to have our authorization, know that we've done our due diligence, and actually created something that was going to be used by mission owners and be able to be taken forward. So I think that's got to be one of my best stories at Platform One, and just in general what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, you don't want to ever bring up the dirty reciprocity word in the cybersecurity world, but this has been a super fun episode to record, and kind of reminds me of old times. But I appreciate you and Jeff both taking the time, and even Jeff doing it while also jockeying dad jobs with a sick child. Definitely know what that's like. So hopefully the listeners enjoyed this one as well, and I appreciate you guys' time.